It's not as if anyone can hear you this far out.
We are talking Wicked Witches, which is coming out on midnight releasing on the 9th of August. This movie was originally made as the title The Witches of Dumpling Farm and is directed by Martin Pickering, and he actually co-wrote this with his brother Mark Pickering. So this story focuses on this young guy who he's recently kind of split up with his wife. He's kind of like, 30 or so, like early 30s. And he's kind of on a bit of a downward spiral because he's had a bit of a nasty breakup. So he kind of moves to this kind of local, this rural village, this kind of out the way kind of area in England. And he kind of looks at the local paper and sees that there is actually a room for rent in this kind of local farm. As it happens, this local farm is actually owned by a friend of his, or an old school friend. So he kind of goes there and kind of rents a room and tries to kind of reconnect with this friend who seems to be acting a little bit kind of weird. And then as time goes on, he kind of starts noticing pretty much any female within this kind of small village seems a little bit off. They seem a little bit off kilter. And as the movie progresses, we learn that essentially there is a coven of witches here, and they have evil intent, and the men are either kind of under the thrall of these witches, or they are potential victims. And what will actually happen, you have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss Wicked Witches. Now, according to IMDb, the budget of this movie is just £15,000. The first thing I will say with this movie is I was really impressed with the confidence, the sure of hand, and just the production value of this movie, considering it's apparently such a kind of a low budget, because this movie really is directed with some supreme confidence by the Pickering Brothers here. So hats off for a low budget movie, really not looking like it's that kind of cheap, to be honest with you. So very good. And what I mean by this as well is that the Pickering Brothers seem to have a lot of confidence in their directorial style. So for example, to give you a couple of examples of just neat little touches that I kind of liked. Whenever we have a character on screen that is either a witch or maybe a male that is under the influence, the shots are really kind of tight and kind of close-ups, so that you kind of really only see their face, and the camera angle tends to be kind of looking up, so it kind of looks a little bit kind of intimidating. And then, the lighting and stuff also helps with this. Whilst anyone else, you have a kind of slightly more of a wider angle to give it more of just a human feel to it. So just that kind of like that way the cameras are, the scenes are shot. No special effects, just kind of like making use of the camera angles and stuff like that to give it this kind of like somewhat otherworldly feel. And then some other kind of like neat little things. Just to give you another example here. These witches, when they're actually quite monstrous in their sort of true form and kind of more creature-like rather than just kind of like human witches, more like demons to a certain degree. I mean, you don't really know what they are, but I'm guessing witches by the title, but they kind of end up looking more like demons to a certain degree. But for example, when they kind of roar and they have these kind of like razor-sharp teeth and stuff, the camera sort of subtly shakes when they kind of roar. And again, it's just a very subtle technique. For example, that I feel really shows like a strong directorial style. So the first thing I was going to say, I really thought the directing here was pretty good. And really just the whole production looks a lot more expensive than the £15,000 budget that this movie apparently has, because there's a reasonable amount of gore here, there's limbs being ripped off, heads being pulled off, quite a lot of kind of prosthetics, practical effects, things like that. I mean, it's not all throughout the movie, but there are a couple of sequences within the film where we do see, a good amount of kind of like body parts. And then we kind of, the last act of this movie essentially is in this cave system. It very much reminds me of Descent, but it's almost the other way around, where we have these kind of like the female creature types kind of walking the corridors, and we have a male character or characters really being the victims here. But it kind of reminds me of the Descent to a certain degree. But within that sequence, there's lots of kind of like props and kind of like wood carvings of all various different kind of like, you know, demonic paraphernalia, stuff like that. This kind of adds to the ambience that I thought was really good. I actually enjoyed Duncan Casey as our kind of main character here, because I thought he made a very much a likeable everyman. So he's very much your average guy, and I thought it really lends that kind of like, you know, a sense of realism, because you can kind of put yourself in this guy's shoes, because he doesn't come across as anything particularly kind of, he's not an expert in karate or anything like that. He's just kind of very much a kind of an everyman with a kind of a very kind of like situation that a lot of people find themselves in regards to getting a divorce, things like that, and just this kind of like the way he acts, I thought is very kind of true, and I actually kind of really liked his performance. In particular, I liked his the character's on-screen chemistry with his friend Steve, this other guy that kind of turns up, who's a bit more of a kind of a you know, a party-going bachelor, so to speak. But the scenes where they have together, I thought really have a great chemistry in regards to just seeming naturally like friends, and like, for example, I am with my male friends, and the kind of like the banter that we have sort of back and forth, but also that kind of like, you know, making sure your friend's okay and things like that. So you have a real sense of these guys are truly friends, and that was a good portrayal on screen, I felt. There's some pretty decent kind of makeup effects in regards to the actual witch prosthetics as well. And the movie doesn't go too much into kind of going into the backstory of the witches, which I think actually works for this movie. I do feel it kind of gives it, you know, you don't really know what's going on. It's some type of kind of like Wicker Man-ish kind of pagan kind of like sort of situation where this kind of village is obviously kind of all ill in on it to a certain degree, but we never really know too much, but we kind of glean a few clues as to kind of the film progresses. So what doesn't work for me? I feel the Pickering Brothers do a great job directing, but I feel the writing is where this movie lets itself down, and where maybe the Pickering Brothers are quite skillful in regards to their kind of obviously filmmaking prowess here. Because I feel the writing is somewhat pedestrian, and at best and kind of at worst it doesn't make some sense. So the actual story itself, despite some visual flourishes, is fairly pedestrian. There's no real kind of element of anything you haven't seen before. There's no real kind of like clever kind of plot twists. It's very much a kind of a pedestrian kind of A to B kind of plot. And in actual fact, there's long sequences where there's very little dialogue, or no dialogue in fact. And you just feel like you needed something else going on. You needed more of a B plot or something along the lines of that to kind of maybe flesh out the actual story itself a little bit, because at the moment I feel the story is just a little bit sparse in regards to a narrative flow, because there's not a lot actually to this story, if we're being honest. And then I do feel that this movie just kind of ignores some basic logic issues. I mean, why is this guy moving to this village? You might say he was moving to specifically move into with his friend, but that's not the case, because you know, he finds this ad in the paper, so he obviously isn't going there specifically to move with his friend, and it's just like, well, why would you move to such a kind of like a rural village? We don't see this guy ever doing any kind of like work or career, so why would you move there? And kind of like, it just seems like, why wouldn't you get out when you kind of like things kind of start to go a little bit weird? So I just feel that the movie has kind of ignored some certain small, I mean they are relatively small details admittedly, but just to have the kind of the plot conveniences, it's just like, yeah, we kind of have to kind of accept sort of certain things really. And just a few other kind of details I don't really want to go into because of spoilers, but just a few little niggles here and there that I just feel that the movie more or less just ignores, because it's just a plot convenience more than anything else. Some of the acting here, I enjoyed our Duncan Casey as our main character, and his relationship with his best mate Steve I thought were very good. Some of the actors, I do feel other actors overact a little bit. It's not so bad where it's distracting and kind of puts you off the movie, but there is an element here of some actors just milking it a little bit too much and kind of giving a somewhat unnatural performance. Now, you could argue these people are witches or they're possessed, but it's a little bit too much, I feel. It almost kind of borders on campy a little bit sometimes. It's not everyone and it's not every time, but there's just a few sequences here and there where I feel maybe the actors are kind of are just like going a little bit too far and needed to be kind of reined in a little bit. The movie has a relatively kind of serious tone, and there are times here where it almost feels like you're going into kind of like horror comedy, because these actors are just kind of like hamming it up a little bit too much, and that isn't the actual tone of the film that this movie is sort of going for. So overall I think this is a visually kind of like really kind of interesting movie with a great central protagonist, some great kind of like practical effects, some reasonable gore and makeup effects and stuff like that, and you know, an okay if pedestrian and kind of like workman-like kind of story with just a few kind of like plot holes and kind of logic issues, but certainly worth a watch. I actually enjoyed this movie and would like to see more from this kind of like this team. And yeah, it's certainly worth a watch if you like that kind of thing, if you like witches or kind of pagan sort of style horror. So 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me comments and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.